Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Michaela Kerrison, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Aircraftwoman Jade Lawler. This evening, we warmly welcome the Royal Australian Navy Joint Health Command delegation in attendance. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Thank you. If you are able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in far-away places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private George Forrest, who served in Australian units in 3 wars. George Forrest was born in 1858 in Stewartstown, County Tyrone, Ireland. Very little is known about his early life, but at some point he immigrated to New South Wales and settled in Sydney. From the mid-19th century, the Australian colonies began to develop their own military units. Forrest enlisted in the colonial military forces in 1883, joining A Battery of the New South Wales Artillery. At this time, the region of South Egypt, known as Sudan, was in a state of political turmoil. A British-backed Egyptian regime was nominally in charge, but a large-scale rebellion led by a leader known as the Mahdi had defeated Egyptian forces on several occasions. In the aftermath of the killing of a popular British general in Khartoum, in January 1885, a large British force was sent to Sudan. In support of this force, the New South Wales government offered to send a contingent of infantry and artillery to Sudan. This contingent was the first time a self-governing British colony had sent its own military forces overseas in service of the Empire. Places in the contingent were preferentially given to soldiers already serving in New South Wales military units. Forrest volunteered for the contingent and sailed with the artillery from Sydney in March 1885. He served at the rank of driver, suggesting that he was an experienced horseman. The contingent disembarked at the Red Sea port of Sawakin at the end of March. The infantry marched inland to confront Mahdi's forces, while the artillery carried out drill exercises in Sawakin and surrounds. The deployment to Sudan was brief, and the British soon decided to withdraw from the region. Forrest and the remainder of the contingent returned to Sydney in June 1885. In 1896, Forrest married Mary Ball in Sydney. 2 years later, the couple had a daughter, Linda Elizabeth. But Mary died in the same year. It seems that baby Linda was taken into care of her maternal grandmother. When the Sudan contingent had been disbanded, Forrest had returned to service with A Battery. The battery's next overseas service was to be in the South African War, often called the Boer War, involving Dutch colonies there. In October 1899, after a worsening political deadlock in the southern Africa, Boer forces invaded the British colonies of Cape Colony and Natal. Britain declared war on 2 Boer republics, the Orange Free State and South African Republic. In support of the British Empire, each of the Australian colonies committed troops to the conflict. In addition to mounted infantry, the colony of New South Wales also committed A Battery, the only Australian colonial artillery unit to be sent to the South African War. On arrival in South Africa, the battery was split into 3 sections, with each joining different British forces in the field. After 18 months of service, A Battery returned to Sydney in August 1901. Shortly after returning from the war, Forrest left A Battery, in which he had served for 19 years. He moved to Newcastle to work as a labourer. His mother-in-law became the guardian of his daughter, Linda, and she later reported that she had never heard from him again. In January 1916, Forrest attended a recruitment station in New South Wales to volunteer for service in the Australian Imperial Force. He told the recruiter that he was 45 years old, which was the maximum age for enlistment, but in truth, he was about 58. Forrest joined the newly raised 34th Australian Infantry Battalion. After initial training in Australia, the battalion sailed from Sydney on board the transport ship Hororata in early May 1916. The unit continued training in England and sailed to France in November. In northern French winter of 1916 and 1917 was the coldest in several decades, and Forrest wrote home to his daughter, "It is terrible cold here in the trenches." The men of the 34th Battalion spent time in billets near the city of Armentières, close to the Belgian border. No major battles took place during the winter, but while in the trenches, the men endured German artillery barrages, snipers, machine gun fire, gas attacks, and raiding patrols. In March, Forrest spent some time ill in the hospital, but soon recovered and rejoined his unit. In the middle of 1917, British commanders turned their attention away from the Somme River sector and towards the border of France and Belgium. They planned a major offensive aimed at capturing the higher ground outside the town of Ypres in Belgium. The first step in this campaign was to be the capture of the ridgeline outside the town of Messines. In preparation for the assault on Messines, British, Canadian, and Australian soldiers had dug mines underneath the German positions and filled them with explosives. Just after 3 a.m. on the 7th of June 1917, these explosives were detonated, and the Allied soldiers charged the German lines. Forrest was working as a batman to the company commander, Captain Walter Matthews. He took part in the charge, but what happened next is unclear. Captain Matthews later recalled, "We went over together and he was never seen again. It seems likely that Forrest was killed by a shell." He was 59 years old. Forrest's body was found and buried 5 days after the attack, but in the subsequent fighting, his gravesite was lost. His name appears on the Meningate Memorial in Ypres alongside more than 54,000 Commonwealth troops who were killed in Belgium during the war and whose burial places are unknown. Forrest was survived in Australia by his daughter Linda. In early 1917, he had a chance encounter in England with his former brother-in-law. This meeting prompted Forrest to write a letter to Linda, whom he had not seen since 1902, when she was 4 years old. Private George Forrest is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private George Forrest, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you are able, please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. but in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.